Botany Manor is a game about growing plants in unique and almost magical ways. But it's also the story about growing as a person in the face of adversity. It's about forging your path in life, even when the world is telling you to just stick with the status quo. It's the story of Arabella Green, a self-taught expert in botany in 19th century England. And while we get to see her grow all of these unique and rare flowers, the major underlying theme of the story is how she followed her passion despite everyone trying to keep her in a woman's place. Arabella's life is revealed slowly through letters, cards, newspaper clippings, and other environmental clues around the manor. She has rejected the traditional life of a 19th century woman, preferring to pursue knowledge through books as well as being out in the field to study the plants she loves so much. There's a very strong theme on how women should be happy little housewives and that they aren't smart enough for anything that requires any serious intellect. She's told she should focus on finding a husband, that her understanding of botany is amateurish at best, and that her passions just aren't worth pursuing. At times I would think, wow, she just happened to keep every letter that told her how incompetent she was as a woman. That's convenient. But then I started thinking, maybe she kept those reminders as motivation. Maybe she had that whole let your haters be your motivators philosophy. She wanted to be reminded of how much the world was against her and how much she planned to prove them wrong. This game really started me thinking on how difficult it is to actually face adversity, to actually step out on a limb and take a risk. Being yourself is not always easy. Doing what you love is not always easy. There are so many challenges that come up along the way that make us question our commitment to ourselves. I think back historically, even today, on my own ancestors in my home country who wanted to read and be educated, and how so many of them did it at the risk of losing their life, or how throughout so much of history and even today, so many people are outcasted or harmed simply because they love who they love or they dared to dress in a way that made other people uncomfortable. Arabella's story isn't the only story of adversity in Botany Manor. The game has a surprising number of historically accurate references. Even seemingly random throwaway details were rooted in bigger issues. For instance, Arabella's friend Grace mentioned families importing gray squirrels from the Americas to England, and following this, Grace didn't see red squirrels anymore. That's a very real thing that happened. In my cursory Google research, I learned that when people brought back gray squirrels from North America to Great Britain, the squirrels carried a virus that they were immune to, but the red squirrels were not, so it decimated the red squirrel population. Add to that the competition for food and resources, and the red squirrels just really suffered to the point that people had to step in. So not a throwaway detail at all. But the story that really struck me was the side story of Nicholas Owens and the priest holes. Again, both very real events in history. Back in the 1570s, during the persecution of Catholics in England, people began to build priest holes in their homes to hide Catholic priests from priest hunters. Nicholas Owens built many of these from the years of 1588 until 1606, until he was arrested and tortured to death by prison authorities in the Tower of London. He didn't even give up any information. Now, that's commitment. I know we all like to think that we'd have the guts to be so dedicated to a cause that we'd literally put our life on the line for it. So it's always awe-inspiring to see when others do exactly that. Arabella's home was built in 1593 during Owen's construction phase, and we see that the religious blessing hanging in the kitchen was gifted by him. We also see him being referenced in the book The History of England. And when we do find a priest hole, the letter that we find there was written by Richard Blount, a priest who was ordained in 1589 and ministered to others while hiding out in priest holes and carefully traveling from place to place. They weren't afraid to do what they felt was right. Arabella was born in 1835, and her mother passed away when she was around the age of 3 and before her younger sister Elizabeth turned 1, so they were likely raised by their father and had close relationships with other family members. From a young age, Arabella took an interest in flowers, so much so that her childhood nickname was Flora, a word that refers to plant life. And not only did she have an interest in flowers, but also in drawing and painting, which she used to immortalize the plants and flowers that she loved so much. Because educating women was not a priority in the 19th century, she educated herself on anything that she found interesting. This is a trait that ran in her family because her grandmother Mary also studied how the light from the setting sun affected the bloom of the nightfall, And her grandmother's research extended way back beyond 1830, before Arabella was even born. When we step into the shoes of Arabella, she is around 55 years old. It's September of 1890, and she's recently returned from London to her family's manor in the Somerset countryside. In the post is a blank herbarium, sent to her from Mayflower Publishing House, where they requested that she fills it with her research to be considered for publication. Back during the 1800s, women were not viewed as having the ability to understand science, nor were they respected as potential students in just about anything. When Arabella was 18, she applied to University College London, a public research university founded in 1826. Her denial came with the explanation that the school will never admit women because, quote, botany is a serious science conducted in laboratories and lecture halls. They considered her interest a hobby where she's tending to a garden in a domestic space because positions at the college are reserved for serious scholars whose studies will go on to be well utilized in a career in botanical experimentation. Interestingly, the Real World University College London was among one of the first university colleges to admit women alongside men in 1878, so Arabella applied about 25 years too early. With the help of her uncle Theodore, she continued to read books and gain practical experience with plants, and chose not to distract herself with things like getting married. When she was 25, her cousin Thomas attempted to have her join him at a New Year's ball to find a potential husband, but that didn't seem to work out the way that he planned. Arabella even tossed a letter written by someone who seriously wanted to court her. He even took the time to write poetry comparing her to flowers, which was really sweet, but still not what she wanted. And when she was 28, Thomas's mother, her Aunt Agnes, insisted that she was becoming too old to marry and she needed to settle into a domestic life quickly. Aunt Agnes felt that scientific pursuits weren't for women and suggested that, if she wanted, Arabella could teach her son what she knew because a son would be better suited for scientific endeavors. But instead of focusing on love, Arabella kept at her botanical studies. When she was 26 years old, she received a response from the Society for Botanical Research about her research proposal on the structure of coastal plants. Actually, it was more of a rejection. They didn't want to work on her project, but suggested that if she wanted to do work out in the field, she should reach out to Professor Montague. The rejection also suggested a book by John Lindley, a real-world botanist, called Ladies' Botany, or A Familiar Introduction to the Study of the Natural System of Botany, which apparently is a book for amateurs and unscientific readers. Basically a basic level book that can be read just for fun. In a newspaper clipping from May of 1929, Lindley was appointed as chair of botany at the University College of London, which is the same college that she applied to and perhaps even the reason why she applied. This news article is from before Arabella was even born, so it's likely that her grandmother kept this, being as though she had her own interest in researching various flora. At the time the society rejected her, I don't know how much she was into the whole science of everything, but at this later stage in her life, Arabella is quite the scientific researcher. All over the home and the grounds, we see information on wind speeds and soil pH and tracking sunsets and animal patterns and sugar grams and all sorts of scientific data. So maybe she was already into deeper scientific studies, or maybe it was the rejections that made her decide to give the world a big ol' FU. But she did reach out to Montague and joined his metal orchids research team in July of 1862, along with his wife Anne and fellow botanist Robert Brown. They studied the orchids, and Montague even wrote a book titled Metal Orchids of Britain, which he named Robert Brown, but conveniently neglected to include her name as a fellow researcher. 2 years later, he did thank her personally, considering her contributions to be invaluable, and he agreed to put in a good word to the Botanical Society for her. I suppose from his perspective, he didn't want his work to be devalued by people learning that he was helped by a woman, but he decided to help her in whatever way he could. Despite the lack of support over the years, Arabella persisted. She spent many years traveling and learning, collecting souvenir coins from her ventures along the way. She made friends with other botanists and women interested in the field, always sharing what she knew with anyone who cared enough to hear what she had to say. She was a listening ear to the other women who felt as unheard as she did. She became a mentor to other young women and girls who took an interest in botany but weren't able to get a traditional education. It was even suggested that she try publishing her book under her uncle's name so that it would actually have a chance to be taken seriously. But she didn't do that. Arabella was pushed to the shadows long enough and wanted to be recognized for what she brought to the world. It's likely this mentality that was the reason why she had all of the women on her family tree listed by their maiden name, not their married name. She wanted them to be known for who they are, not who they were married to. In a thank you card, the idea of teaching was suggested to her, and we immediately see that Arabella has been teaching herself how to be a good teacher, which ultimately served her well because the game ends with the herbarium being rejected by the publishing company, but I think she saw that coming. Instead, she printed her own versions and used them as textbooks to start a school for other young women interested in the field. So, on April 12, 1891, the Green School of Botany was born. Finally, she's being recognized and celebrated for her contributions to the field. This game seems so simple, but there was so much interconnected that was really impressive. One of the things that I thought was clever was how the chapters of her book, Forgotten Flora, not only reflected the types of plants found in each chapter, but also tracked the trajectory of her life. First off, it's called Forgotten Flora, which not only reflects the idea that the plants she is growing are plants that are becoming harder to find out in the wild, but also it's a wordplay on the fact that her nickname is Flora, and that perhaps in many ways she feels like her potential and contributions have been forgotten. Chapter 1, A Fresh Start, not only represents the fact that the windmill wort purifies the air, but it also reflects that Arabella is about to embark upon a new and fresh stage of her life. Chapter 2, Survivors of Adversity, centers on plants that bloom in ways that most plants would find adversive. But the clues found in this chapter also start to reveal the adversity that Arabella felt in her own life, particularly how she was often passed over for her knowledge simply because she's a woman. Chapter 3, Procure Your Petals, are where we grow the wolf glove and pixie tears, which require some really unique methods to bloom. But here we also discover some of the really unique history of the manor, such as its ties to major historical events. In Chapter 4, Botanical Allies, where the nightfall, sapphire gloom, cradle fern, and brook chalice are the focal points, we also start to become acquainted with the human botanical allies that Arabella has in her own life. For instance, the women that she mentored, her work with Professor Montague, and we also get to see how her own grandmother had a passion for studying plants. Chapter 5, Climbing Up, highlights the spring dance shrub, fool's emerald, and the ocelot, which are all plants that grow tall, but is also the part of Arabella's story where she stands tall to reach the next level of her life. She uses all of her knowledge that she's gathered over the years to continue her research and teach the next generation, no longer having to rely on others for validation and creating a space for other young women to be the women that they want to be. If you've made it this far, I truly thank you. Let me know your thoughts about the game and about my thoughts. Who knew there was such a story here? If you enjoyed this, you just might enjoy my analysis of the story Grease, an indie classic about grief and life and the beauty of healing. I'll see you in the next one.